going to read right over here. Okay, we're thinking about baptism. We're thinking about promises and God's commitment to us. And first we hear how comforting that is. We're going to think about that. And then we're going to kind of listen through the promises, and we're going to think about the calling of baptism. So we're going to move around in that territory for a little while together this morning. Kate's going to read our scripture passage, Genesis 9, 8 to 17. Annika picked it out for us today, so thank you, Annika. And it's really fitting because the promises that we hear made to us in baptism, they rest on this foundational commitment that God makes. So Kate, thank you for reading for us.
Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the earth with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring the clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all the living creatures of every kind. Never again will all the waters become a flood to destroy all the life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the cloud, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all the living creatures of every kind on the earth. So God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all the life on the earth. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Kate. There's something about welcoming a child into this world, into your family, into your life, that gets your attention. At least it gets my attention. And it's our situation. It's not because a child might cry a lot, not even because they might woo us, right? You see that first smile, maybe a first laugh. You start to wonder, what does God have in store for this child? What will they become? Who will they become? There's full of possibilities. That's not what I have in mind. There's something about this that gets our attention, and it's when we begin to realize just how little control we have over this whole thing. So we welcome this child in, and for a few days, few weeks, few months, maybe in a few years, it feels like we have a lot of control, especially now. We're the ones that we wake, we feed, we swaddle, we care for, we protect, we make sure that they have what they need. We feel pretty central to this child's life, and in fact, at this point, without us or without somebody stepping into that role, Mariella would suffer. But we know, all of us know, that over time, we really don't have that much control. Because, well, on the one hand, there's illnesses, and sometimes they're really devastating, and sometimes we can't do anything about it. Sometimes accidents happen, and we can't control them, and they're terrible accidents. The news is telling us about, 12 young kids and their coach trapped in a cave. These things happen. Sometimes people do terrible things to children. They deceive them. They lure them into something, and their life becomes very, very difficult. I was watching a documentary this week about smugglers from Guatemala, and they would come to this remote mountain village in Guatemala where teenagers have a very difficult time living. It's poor. There's just no way forward. So they say, hey, I can get you to the United States. You come with me. I'll get you there. $15,000, and there'll be plenty of opportunity. So they go with. They're not sure where the money's going to come from, but they're assured that it'll be there. So they come to the border. They're processed through. They need somebody to sponsor them. So the smuggler has contacts, in this case, in Pennsylvania, and the contacts step in as the sponsor. But then what happens is that they're actually, they enslave these young people in very impoverished situations, and they can't get out. Sometimes things like this happen in our world, and we find that we just don't have that much control. For as much as it seems like we all know that we just don't have that much control. Sometimes kids, well, they break our heart. Not because they mean to, just sometimes things happen. Sometimes they're going to make decisions at some point down the road, and best as we can to provide counsel and guidance and wisdom, or even what we want for our best wishes, they're going to do something else. They might decide otherwise. Part of our reality is Eliana and Annika have had a front row seat to seeing international students live in our house. And Ricky came when she was 14. 14. And we look at that and we think, sheesh, when our girls get to 14, not a chance. We don't know that, though. I mean, what if the Lord were to lead in such a way, and that became the calling? Now, it's hard for us to imagine that, but maybe it doesn't happen at 14. Maybe it happens at 24. Maybe it happens at 34. Maybe it happens at 44, where the Lord says, I need you here. And it looks difficult, but the faithful thing to do is to step into it. And mom and dad might say, I don't know about that. And yet that's where the Lord leads, and we have to accept that. We just don't have that much control. So these promises that God makes very early in Scripture, they really get our attention. The flood is over. The waters have receded. The ark has come to rest. Noah and his family step out. The animals step out. Noah offers a sacrifice of thanks. We can imagine there are probably many reasons why he offered the sacrifice. And then God speaks. And actually, God says quite a bit. And there's one phrase that he repeats 5 times from the end of Genesis 8 into Genesis 9. And the phrase is, never again. I'll quickly read what he's saying. He says, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Never again. Now this gets our attention, just like the flood gets our attention. And we find that in this narrative, 3.5 chapters, we're first struck by just how frightening the power of God is. And then we're struck by the resolve of God and what God commits himself to. We're frightened because, yikes, there's just no easy way around a flood. Where God sees the corruption and the violence of the world and sees fit to undo that which he has brought about. So in the beginning, there's these waters, and they're terrible, and they don't allow for any order, any life, any harmony. And God separates them, and he creates land, and because of this land is there, and there's order and distinction, then life flourishes. And God sees fit to undo it all. In the face of corruption and violence, God says, I'm going to undo it all, save for one family and a starter kit's worth of animals. Everything else destroyed. And that gets our attention. Maybe we think of some line like in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where they're wondering about Aslan. And they say, well, is Aslan safe? And Mr. Beaver says, who said anything about safe? Right? No, Aslan is very, very good. But Aslan is not safe. We sang it this morning. Our God is a consuming fire, a burning holy flame with glory and freedom. And we find that this God is serious. This God creates and sets forth an order, and he means it. And when he runs up against untold corruption and violence, this God says, no more. And that's not God's last word, though, and that's the really stunning thing. 5 times God says, never again. You've seen my power. You've seen my judgment. You've seen how I've got the ability to undo that which I have made, and yet never again will I do it. And given where this narrative ends, right here in Genesis 9, we're left with the impression that God is going to see his purposes for creation through, come what may, even through sorrow and pain. Even through sorrow and pain. Sometimes parents see children make one bad decision and it leads to another and another and another and another, and then there's just heartache and ruin. And maybe the kid's constantly in trouble, they're harming themselves, they're harming somebody else. And it's total heartache. And what you see is the parent not giving up, pursuing, keeping after, extending an openness. Come back. And we find that this too is a reflection of God. Because in Hosea 11, with his people in exile, God acknowledges that, wow, I've taught you to walk. I took you by the hand. I provided everything you need. I gave you